All right. Good afternoon, Alex. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation for this interview. Los Altos Residents is an organization of your neighbors who care deeply about the city and whose mission is to ensure that every resident's voice is heard by the city council, the commissions, and city staff. We're pleased to get this opportunity to get to know you better and to learn more about why you're running for city council. I want to spend just a minute going over the ground rules of these interviews. All of the questions were sent to each candidate prior to the interview, and each candidate will be asked the same questions. We will post unedited videos of all the interviews on our website, losaltosresidents.org. Our goal is to help voters learn more about each of the candidates through this series of interviews during this challenging time with the COVID-19 shelter in place, when traditional in-person debates and small neighborhood meetings are discouraged. So all 7 candidates were invited and all 7 accepted our invitation to be interviewed. However, after reviewing the questions, Sally Meadows and Jonathan Weinberg withdrew and notified us they did not want to be interviewed. Okay, but now, Alex, we'd like you to take just a minute to introduce yourself before the first question.
So my name is Alex Rubashevsky. I grew up in Los Altos. I went to Mountain View High School. I went to Foothill College. I graduated from Chico State with a degree in construction management and then came back to Los Altos. And I opened up my company here where I do real estate. I'm a real estate broker, and I'm also a general contractor. So one-stop shop for me to be able to help clients with whatever they need. So my goal for running for city council was I truly and deeply love the city, and I would like to do what I can to make sure that we can keep the city, keep the charm of the city, while still allowing for every single property to be able to grow and increase in value. And so I want basically to put money back into the pockets of all the people in Los Altos with property values.
Okay, wonderful. The first question is, in your role as a resident, what are your most significant contributions to the community?
So I have built a few homes in Los Altos, 3 actually at the moment. And so one's actually in the unincorporated county. So I don't know if that quite counts, but still within the city limits. And so I've worked with the city to develop the plans, push them through, and then increase the value of property and make it nicer. So.
Wonderful. What are your priorities, and what will you do to make sure that they are accomplished?
So my priority is to increase, basically, we're being outpaced by our neighbors in terms of growth. And I would like us to be able to catch up on our rate of growth in terms of property value specifically. That's kind of my point on this, to make sure that we can, to keep our property values increasing, to be able to provide more money for the city, for the community, for the development of any projects that we need in capital improvements. So kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats. And so what I would do is I would essentially vote along those lines to try and to fiscally responsibly spend money where it needs to be spent, to listen to my constituents and make sure that their voices are heard, and make sure that any changes that we make as a community and decide to, if Los Altos needs to grow in a certain way, that everyone understands why and that we can move forward with it that way.
Okay. When financial demands of Los Altos exceed the available and projected public funds, what factors will you consider in allocating these funds to the competing demands?
So I look at the budget of a city similarly to the budget of a family. So whatever we have to do that is a necessity, we'll need to spend money on it. Whatever brings the most benefit to the city afterwards, financial or in terms of use and benefit to the residents, goes next. And then nice to haves is if we have money. So essentially, if there's a crisis and we need to borrow money or do something like that, we will do it. But otherwise, I stand for fiscal responsibility and not spending outside of our means.
Okay, thank you. So there are financial instruments available for cities to raise funds without prior voter approval. What is your position on having Los Altos use this type of financing? And if you would vote for the council to do so, describe one or two instances where you feel it would be appropriate.
So I strongly believe, well, this is a quote from Margaret Thatcher, but there's no such thing as public money. There's only taxpayer money. And as a matter of principle, I would not like to do this kind of thing unless absolute urgency in the making of this decision, and procrastination would be disastrous. So that would be the only time when I would I wholeheartedly agree with that. That's the only time when I would basically bypass voters choosing to spend more money, would be, for example, a collapsed bridge or a fire that burned down parts of the community and we have to spend money on it and there's no budget for it, or like in a pandemic where we have to take care of things. So like if businesses are closing, to make sure that there's no cascade effect. So those are the types of things that I would do. But other than that, I wouldn't vote on something like that.
Okay, good. Thank you. Let's switch to local zoning. Do you believe the current building codes for the various zones, commercial, residential, mixed commercial neighborhood, and especially those relating to building height and density, are appropriate for Los Altos?
So I do believe that for the most part that the single family residential zoning is appropriate. I do believe that we could also increase minor amounts of density in the commercial corridors that are already zoned commercial. I'm going to sort of jump ahead a little bit with one other part. We already California already voted on 2 different proposals to kind of force cities to comply with more housing. So at some point we will need to do that as a city to be able to comply with this. So there's another quote that I really like where it's, Lord, grant me the strength to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So at some point, California has already added teeth to the bills, to SB 1120 and SB 902. I don't think there's any teeth in that one yet, but the idea is at some point we will have to increase the number of units available in Los Altos, one way or another. We can keep fighting tooth and nail, but something will have to happen. So I am in a position of trying to make sure that the voters can actually pick which way they want to do it, to be able to make the absolute best decision for the city as a whole, instead of being forced by California or rash decisions to be able to make it happen. So I want to inform the voters of our choices and basically put it to them to decide where we want to do this. It's not a question of if, it's a question of where and how. So we will at some point have to do this. So I would like the voters to be able to vote on where we're going to.
Okay, so that does bring up your position with respect to Housing Bill SB 1120 and SB 902, which are still pending in the legislature, but can you let us know what you think about those bills and what's your position?
So the SB 1102 or 1120, the ADU bill, I am for residents being able to build another unit in their own backyard for their own use, and for example, an in-law unit, to have your mother-in-law be with you when you're raising a kid. That's personal goal of mine. And so having your kids stay with you once you've grown up a little bit and they can move back to be able to keep the family close. I like that idea of the ADUs, and the fact is that's not overly increasing the density of the population, but still allowing for additional housing. So I agree with the residents choosing if they would like to add another small residence on their own property for their own use, that they can do so. In terms of SB 902, I don't like overreach of city power to be able to just dictate that, you know what, we're going to just label this as a multifamily property now because it's close to a corridor. That's where I was talking about how I want the voters to pick and choose where we do this. And it has to be understood that it's either we do it with everyone's approval and we move forward together as a community, or at some point we're going to have to do this and someone's going to be unhappy. So I prefer not to use SB 902 to just change zoning without the constituents using it, or without the constituents say so. I prefer to vote on projects that the citizens can stand behind.
Thank you, Alex. Let's switch to one of the hot topics in town and nationwide. Are you in favor of defunding the Los Altos Police Department?
So I personally am not. I feel that the police department of Los Altos has done a fantastic job. And I don't feel that there has been any systemic problems in the city of Los Altos. At least I can't speak for everybody. I can only speak on my own personal experiences, but I don't think that that needs to happen in the city of Los Altos. I do believe that we need to have more accountability. When I called police for, I had my muffler stolen off of or catalytic converter stolen off of my Prius. The police officer showed up, body camera, all of that was fine for the transparency and accountability. So as long as those things are in effect, I believe that we already have the transparency that we need in our city.
Okay, thank you. How would you define a resident-friendly candidate for city council?
So a resident-friendly candidate is someone who shares what they believe and what they plan on doing, and explains it to the residents, listens to their constituents, and votes not just for their own personal best interest, but for the best interest of the whole community.
Okay. What will you do as an individual council member to keep current with the wants and needs of Los Altos voters? And if you could give some specifics, that would be excellent.
So I feel that one of the issues that we have is we don't have enough communication going out to our constituents. I know that there was a hot topic issue that came up regarding a dog park where the residents only found out at basically like a day or two before the vote. So it would be to keep the voters informed. So an informed voter is a good voter. They know what's going on. They know what the issues are, and they understand. So I would try and get as much information for all of the things that we're trying to do to as many constituents as I can, whether that's an outreach to create an automatic email that goes out and tell the voters that here are the issues that we have going forward. Here's what we're going to be voting on, and to actively pursue getting people to look at it. So there's social media, there's Twitter, there's all those other social platforms, but I would also try and make it more available and easier to find on the website. And I guess like an email reminder, or maybe like a text reminder to people saying, hey, we're going to be voting on city council. Here are the issues, come out, at least participate, read about it, and do executive summary or cliff notes so that there'd be something afterwards so residents can understand what was going on.
All right, thank you. Are you satisfied with the level of transparency within this Los Altos city government? And if you're not, what would you do to improve it?
So that kind of goes back to the previous point where the transparency exists, but you have to actively try and find it. So I would be not just transparency, but also having it out in the open. So we can find it, but I want to be a little more readily available. I know the city council is working on it. Actually was on another meeting with them where they're explaining what they're trying to do with the community outreach. And I think there are things that they are trying, and it hopefully is moving in the right direction with new software and new social media presence, to try and get people to be more informed. But the transparency comes with also being in the public's vision. So it's not just that you can find it; it's that it's easy to find it. So I'd try and make it more available, not just in the newspaper, but also if you want to search for an issue, that it pops up right away.
Great, thank you, Alex. Please describe what you believe should be the proper relationship between the city council and our city manager.
So the way that I see this is actually, it's the best analogy I can think of is the citizens and residents of Los Altos are all essentially taxpayers, and they are shareholders. The city council is a board of directors, and the city manager is the CEO. So the city council decides what we want to have done, and the city manager will then go and essentially make sure that it gets done. So we tell them what and how we want done, and the city manager goes and does it.
All right. What's your position regarding the use of city parks or city-sponsored art for political ends, political purposes?
So for that, 1 sec. I don't think that we can use the city parks or any city property for political views. The city should remain politically neutral in terms of what we do and what we represent. If people want to create like a one-day mural or an event or something like that in a park, to like an art fair or something like that, I think that they are more than welcome to do so. But I think that a city should remain politically neutral and not push their own agenda.
Okay. What's your position regarding funding offers from private groups who wish to alter a city park so as to facilitate a particular activity favored by that group?
So I believe that for example, if they would like to add on like a soccer field that everyone can use, that gets taken down. Basically, if we want to build a soccer field and someone wants to have soccer games, I think that's completely okay. As long as it's accessible and available to all the other residents and there's no monopoly on the use of that. I'm all for people dedicating benches and trees to help fund the beautification of the parks and the maintenance. But in no way should any contribution deter from the use and enjoyment of the park by the residents.
Okay, so just to dig down a bit on that question, if a private group offered to pay for installing a sports facility that they wanted to use, and it was really predominantly for the use of the private group, although theoretically it's open to everyone in the city, would that change your view on that point?
So I would want the facility to be more available to the residents than for the private group. I'm not looking to put a football stadium, for example, in the city of Los Altos that's being used by a football team and occasionally can go out and have a picnic in the middle of it. What I'd be looking at more so, if they would like to build for example, like tennis courts. If an athletic club would like to build a tennis court somewhere, but it's open to the public 90% of the time, I think that's completely acceptable. It's about the better use for the public than for the individual group. And if they would like to create something that fits into the needs of the city, then I would do something like that. I would support that.
And would it change your mind at all? Would it make any difference to you if their funding offer was partial or full funding?
Um, it would depend on what we are already spending money on. And if it goes back to the previous point of the family budget, if there's money in the budget for the nice to haves, and it's something that the city would like and the residents would like and the constituents support, then it doesn't make it much of a difference to me, as long as there's no poison pills in the contract. So if they would like to just build a park and have it be open to everybody, and they just say everyone follows the exact same reservation policy, and they just reserve it right away for the specific 10% of the time they want to, I have no problem if they pay for 100%, as long as it doesn't interfere with the use and enjoyment by the residents.
Okay. Last point on that question, if there's any conditions on their offer to fund, how do you feel about conditions?
So conditions, for the only condition that I would support would be a temporary one. If, for example, they're looking to build something, spend all the money on it, and for the first 6 months they get first dibs on it, something like that, because they spent the money on it, but it needs to become available to everybody. That's the only type of a condition that I would accept on any public land being used for any other, we'll call it an interest group, as long as it helps the city and as long as it makes the city better, I am all for it, but that needs to be open and available to all the people.
Okay, good. How do you feel about the proposed reach codes that the city is contemplating? And how do you feel about the manner in which the Environmental Commission, the city staff, and the city council have moved this item along towards a scheduled vote next month? So
I'm not fully sold on the reach program or reach code idea. So it's a great idea, but for the future, but we're not ready for it yet. We currently have problems with blackouts and power generation because the power grid's not up to par. We have a lot of solar in California, but with the fires and dust and other issues, it's not generating as much power as we need. And we've been threatened with rolling brownouts right now. So if everything is running off of electricity, I'm not willing to leave the citizens, the residents of Los Altos, literally out in the cold or in the heat. And I think that eventually it is a very, very good goal to go with greener power and green power generation. And then with that, if the grid can support it, to then mandate that everyone has to go onto electrical, as long as it doesn't overly increase costs. But the state of California and the power grid is not ready for that yet. And in terms of voting for it too early, I can't speak on this at the moment because I didn't see this beforehand, which goes back to the transparency. So now that I know that this is being voted on so soon, I think it's a little premature by a couple years, maybe like 5 to 10 years, until we get the grid in California up to where it needs to be, or secure power walls or something like that, so that people are safe from blackouts and the rolling blackouts that happen. Because if everything runs, if we're in the middle of winter and the power goes out, with a furnace, you can still, well, actually, you still can't run the furnace because we have a fan. So you can cook on a gas stove and you can heat something up. You can light a gas fireplace to keep warm. But if everything's off of electricity and the grid goes out, you're up a creek without a paddle.
Okay. Well, that's the last of our questions, Alex, but I wanted to give you some time now to just, give us a final wrap up and summary of your thoughts and your goals.
So I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you and for posting on the forum. I'm looking to, as you may have understood from what I've said in my answers, I'm looking to change very, very minor things in Los Altos to keep us growing and at pace with the cities nearby. I think that I love Los Altos. I grew up here and I want it to continue being as coveted as it is, but I don't want to change the things that make Los Altos as charming as the city is. Now, there will be some growing pains in the future that we'll have to do, but I believe that with informed voters and with an understanding as to why we need to do these things, that we'll be in a better position if we get to pick how we want the city to grow and how we want the city to change without losing its charm. And I look forward to the opportunity, if elected, to be able to help keep the city as wonderful as it is while moving it forward into this modern age.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Alex. It's been a real pleasure getting to meet you and getting to hear your views. And we want to just tell you how much we appreciate you participating in this series of interviews. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.